The chairs had been placed. The red boxes were sealed. Every senior advisor expected the Privy Council meeting to begin within minutes. Then King Charles entered without his ceremonial papers, looked directly at Prince Edward, and made a decision no one in the chamber had prepared for. The council was cancelled, not delayed, not shortened, but cancelled, because his own brother had refused to support Camilla. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the room understood the danger before anyone spoke. The Privy Council, a formal body of senior advisors who approve important decisions in the sovereign's name, had been summoned at Buckingham Palace to confirm Camilla's expanded advisory role during growing strain around the king. Edward's support was meant to make the proposal appear united, not like a husband using royal power to protect his wife. Without him, the arrangement looked dangerously exposed. The monarch stepped toward the table and saw the unsigned declaration beside Edward's chair. He quietly told the clerk of the council, the official who records and processes its decisions, to close the red folder immediately. That command ended everything. Charles had cancelled the full session because his brother refused to support the motion increasing Camilla's influence within the royal household. Edward remained near the doorway as the king turned on him. Charles asked whether the refusal was final. The Duke held his gaze and answered that loyalty to a brother could never require silence about the crown. The words did more than reject Camilla. They suggested the proposal had crossed the line between family devotion and royal authority. Camilla waited in the adjoining room, expecting an aide to summon her for confirmation. Instead, a courtier entered and whispered that the council had been cancelled. She removed her glasses, set them down, and asked, "Was it Edward?" When the aide nodded, the queen consort said nothing. Her silence carried humiliation and fear that the family had judged her. Edward's refusal had not been spontaneous. Inside his coat rested a private note linked to Queen Elizabeth's final wishes about the limits of a consort's power. He had brought it as protection, not theater. Charles knew continuing without him would expose a family fracture and turn Camilla's expected victory into public disgrace. As the councillors left through separate exits, Edward received a message. The king wanted him alone, not as sovereign and subject, but as brother against brother. But before Charles could confront the man who had stopped the council, he first had to face the painful truth of why Edward's support had mattered more than anyone else's. To the outside world, Prince Edward had always seemed the safest royal in the room, the quiet brother, the dependable son, the man who rarely challenged the machinery of monarchy. That was precisely why his refusal cut so deeply. Charles had expected resistance from courtiers, caution from William, even cold judgment from Anne. He had never expected the brother who stood beside him through grief to become the one man who said no. Edward sat alone in the small antechamber and slowly turned his wedding ring as silence settled around him. He had spent years avoiding family confrontations because he believed stability mattered more than personal recognition. That quiet reputation was exactly why everyone expected him to agree without hesitation. A royal household, the group of advisors and staff who help the sovereign and senior royals perform official duties, relies heavily on trust behind closed doors. If someone as dependable as Edward suddenly refused, the damage reached far beyond one cancelled meeting. It threatened confidence inside the family itself, and that confidence was the foundation holding every public appearance together. Charles remained inside the empty council chamber, unable to stop replaying the moment his brother withheld support. The king did not see defiance. He saw betrayal. In his mind, defending Camilla meant defending the woman who had stood beside him through years of relentless criticism, impossible expectations, and deeply personal sacrifice. If she could not rely upon the family now, then he feared every hardship they had endured together had been dismissed in a single morning. The proposal mattered because it promised continuity if illness or exhaustion ever forced him to step back temporarily. Without that reassurance, uncertainty would follow every decision made around the crown. Edward understood the same proposal through an entirely different lens. Compassion pulled him toward his brother, but duty pulled him toward the institution they had both sworn to protect. The crown, The enduring office of the sovereign, rather than the individual wearing it, could never become shaped by emotion alone. As he reflected on that burden, he remembered promising Queen Elizabeth that personal affection must never outweigh constitutional responsibility. That promise echoed louder than any argument inside the council chamber. Camilla found Sophie waiting quietly nearby. The Queen Consort admitted the refusal felt painfully personal, because Edward understood better than anyone how desperately she had worked to earn acceptance inside the family. Instead of answering immediately, the trusted confidant revealed, during a private recorded conversation between them the previous evening, that her husband had spent hours rereading a handwritten memorandum left by Queen Elizabeth and had chosen not to show it to Charles until the right moment arrived. William had sensed the conflict before anyone else. During a documented private discussion 1 week earlier, the prince had quietly asked Edward whether the proposal truly protected the monarchy or merely shielded the king from an uncomfortable truth. That question never left his thoughts. By the time the council gathered, the answer had already formed inside him. His refusal was no longer a single act of resistance. It had become the first visible crack in a wider struggle that Charles had not yet begun to measure. And the roots of that resistance reached back to one private ceremony, where a single request from Camilla changed Edward's silence into opposition. The cancellation did not begin in the council chamber. It began 11 days earlier inside St. James's Palace, after a memorial service where the family had gathered beneath the weight of Queen Elizabeth's memory. The ceremony itself passed without incident. The rupture came afterward, when Camilla asked Edward to remain behind and presented him with a declaration she believed he would sign without hesitation. Charles left the chapel carrying more strain than anyone dared mention. The memorial marked the anniversary of the late Queen's final public address, and the family understood why it mattered. Her memory still shaped every argument about duty, while the king's exhaustion made continuity impossible to ignore. A memorial service is a formal ceremony of remembrance, but that afternoon, it became dangerous. Camilla watched Sophie, Anne, and William depart before asking Edward to follow her into the old tapestry room. Camilla closed the door and placed a prepared declaration on the table. The document, a written statement intended to confirm official support, asked Edward to endorse her right to coordinate senior working royals whenever Charles was unavailable. She insisted the arrangement would protect her husband, not transfer sovereign power. Yet when he read the final paragraph twice, pushed the fountain pen away, and asked whether William and Anne had agreed, the Queen Consort avoided the question. Edward felt the pressure. His signature was being sought first because his reputation for loyalty could pull the others into line. He told Camilla that secrecy made the proposal look less like protection and more like leverage. She bristled, arguing that Charles needed help before exhaustion became crisis. He answered that compassion could not become a hidden route to control. Anne confirmed the danger later in a documented private conversation. She revealed that she had rejected an earlier draft granting Camilla access to state briefings and influence over household appointments. That language mattered because briefings contain sensitive government information, while appointments shape who controls royal decisions. Sophie then reminded her husband of an instruction Queen Elizabeth gave them after Philip's death. No spouse, however loved, should become the bridge through which the crown's authority was redirected. Edward returned home unsettled. Inside a locked dispatch case, a secure box used for confidential royal papers, he found the late monarch's handwritten memorandum. His hands trembled as he read her warning that succession must never bend under emotional pressure. In that moment, he understood what the council would demand. He would attend, he would stand before Charles, but he would not sign, knowing public refusal would wound his brother more deeply than any private argument. When the brothers finally stood face to face, every buried grievance from that night entered the room with them. No advisors were permitted inside. No minutes were taken. The door closed behind King Charles and Prince Edward, leaving two brothers alone, with a cancelled council, a wounded marriage, and the memory of a mother whose authority still seemed to govern them from beyond the grave. Charles placed Edward's unsigned declaration on the table. Then, in a voice stripped of ceremony, he accused him of choosing the crown over his own family. Edward absorbed the accusation without moving. Charles had ordered every member of staff to remain outside the private library, even after aides warned that his anger was rising. The absence of minutes mattered, because minutes are the official written record of a formal meeting. Nothing said between the brothers would be preserved, softened, or defended later. This was no longer a royal discussion. It was a family wound opening without witnesses. The monarch pushed the unsigned declaration across the table and demanded to know why Edward had embarrassed Camilla before the most powerful advisors in the realm. He answered that he had prevented something worse. If the council had continued, William and Anne would have challenged the proposal openly, turning one refusal into a visible family revolt. Charles struck the table with his palm. He insisted Camilla had earned protection after years of service, public hostility, and private sacrifice. To him, the proposal was not a reward. It was security for the woman who had carried him through pressure few others understood. That mattered, because weakening her role could leave the king isolated precisely when age and exhaustion made dependable support essential. Edward's voice broke, but his position did not. He said he never questioned her devotion to Charles. He questioned whether a husband's gratitude should become permanent royal authority. A constitutional advisor is an independent expert who explains whether a royal decision respects legal and institutional boundaries. He would not surrender Queen Elizabeth's memorandum until such advisors verified its meaning. The king turned away, gripped the back of a chair, and asked whether their mother had placed Edward above him in deciding the monarchy's future. The Duke answered no. She had placed duty above all of them. Charles then revealed, through a private recorded conversation with Camilla the previous night, that she knew the memorandum might exist. The Queen Consort believed Edward had hidden it deliberately to weaken her. Anger surged again. The monarch warned that continued resistance could force him to reconsider his brother's formal responsibilities. Edward reached the door, stopped, and returned. Without another word, he placed the handwritten memorandum on the table. The choice now belonged to Charles. Read his mother's warning, or destroy the challenge unopened. Charles opened the memorandum, and the words inside revealed that the real power struggle had never been between two brothers alone. The document contained no dramatic accusation. There was no attack on Camilla, no command to disgrace her, and no attempt to govern Charles from the grave. That restraint made it more powerful. In several measured paragraphs, Queen Elizabeth had drawn a line between companionship and constitutional authority. As Charles read, the anger left his face. What replaced it was worse: the recognition that Edward's refusal had been rooted in duty, not rebellion. Charles read one sentence 3 times, then lowered himself into a chair and pressed his fingers against his eyes. The memorandum, a private written record meant to guide future decisions, had been composed during the late Queen's final years and entrusted to Edward because he stood outside the direct line of succession and was known for discretion. That mattered because he could guard the warning without appearing to compete for power. The king kept reading. A consort, the spouse of a reigning monarch, could advise, comfort, and represent the sovereign, but could never command heirs, counselors, or senior royal households independently. The distinction struck him with brutal clarity. Love could support authority. It could not become authority. Charles felt judged by a mother he could no longer question. Yet he also knew that ignoring her words would make Edward's refusal appear not disloyal, but morally necessary. The clerk of the council entered only after being summoned. He explained that Charles could call another meeting, but any plan affecting William's household required the prince's cooperation and could provoke formal objections. Anne's position now carried equal weight because she commanded trust across the family and agreed with Edward that unity could not be manufactured through signatures. Then came the second blow. A documented briefing from William's office confirmed that he had prepared his own written objection. The future king stated that Camilla could not direct decisions involving Catherine, George, Charlotte, or Louis without his explicit consent. That mattered because control over their schedules, advisors, or preparation would touch the future of the crown itself. Charles learned something even darker. Palace planners had placed Edward's declaration first because they feared William and Anne would refuse once they saw one another's objections. The strategy had relied on quiet pressure, not genuine agreement. For Charles, that discovery mattered because it transformed a protective family proposal into an operation designed to corner his own siblings. Camilla entered after the reading ended. Charles could not meet her eyes. She understood immediately that the balance had shifted. Instead of defending herself, the Queen Consort asked to see every rejected draft. When the discarded drafts were placed before her, Camilla saw that the cancelled council had already begun changing her place inside the palace. By nightfall, the cancellation had moved beyond a family argument. Appointments were withdrawn. Briefing access was narrowed. Aides who had prepared for Camilla's expanded role received instructions to dismantle the arrangement without explanation. Nothing had been publicly announced, yet the palace was already behaving as though a boundary had been crossed. For the Queen Consort, the silence of the corridors became its own brutal verdict. Charles acted first. He ordered every paper connected to the proposed advisory expansion sealed pending review, which meant Camilla's office could not use, circulate, or approve any part of the plan. A sealed review is a temporary restriction that keeps sensitive documents inactive while their legality and purpose are examined. The decision mattered because it stopped the proposal from quietly surviving through staff instructions, and it signaled that the king no longer trusted the process that had created it. Camilla sat alone at her desk as an equerry removed 3 briefing folders she had expected to receive. The equerry, a senior royal aide responsible for personal and official support, offered no explanation. She watched the door close without protesting. Minutes later, her scheduled meeting with aides from William's and Edward's households was cancelled, while Anne refused to send anyone to future discussions. The Queen Consort confronted Charles before midnight. She told him the cancellation had made her appear hungry for authority when she believed she was accepting a burden he had asked her to carry. The king apologized for hiding the depth of the family's opposition, but he could not promise to revive the proposal. That left her defended as his wife, yet abandoned in the role she had been prepared to assume. Edward returned to Bagshot Park and stood silently in the darkened drawing room. Sophie found him there and heard him admit, during their private conversation, that stopping the meeting had brought no relief. He feared he had permanently damaged his bond with Charles. The trusted confidant reminded him that duty often protects people in ways they cannot appreciate immediately, but even she could not promise reconciliation. A palace aide then uncovered the most dangerous draft. It would have allowed Camilla's office to approve changes to the schedules and public duties of younger royals. William reacted with controlled fury during a documented telephone briefing, warning that such language could eventually influence George's preparation for kingship. Charles now understood that another council meeting would look like an attempt to force the plan through against his family. Edward made one final request: a private meeting with Camilla, without Charles, Sophie, advisors, or declarations between them. That private meeting would transform the conflict, because for the first time, Edward and Camilla would speak without anyone else deciding what their words were supposed to mean. They met in a small morning room with no aides outside the door and no papers waiting on the table. Camilla arrived first. Edward entered moments later, expecting anger, accusation, perhaps even a demand for apology. Instead, she asked him to sit. The battle that had cancelled the Privy Council now rested on 2 people speaking without titles, ceremony, or the protection of Charles standing between them. Camilla chose Clarence House because the room held no royal portraits or official symbols. Clarence House is the London residence used by the King and Queen Consort, but this corner felt stripped of rank. That mattered because neither could hide behind ceremony, and any agreement had to come from honesty rather than pressure. The Queen Consort placed the unsigned declaration between them, tore it once through the middle, and said she no longer wanted Edward's endorsement. He watched silently. She admitted, in their private recorded conversation, that she had accepted the proposed authority because Charles feared becoming unable to protect the stability of his reign. She had feared being left powerless, while the man she loved became vulnerable. Edward answered without triumph. He said his refusal was never meant to diminish her marriage or erase years of public service. It was meant to stop affection from becoming an unofficial route around succession. Succession is the legal order determining who inherits the crown, and influence over William or his children could shape the monarchy after Charles was gone. That was why the boundary mattered. Camilla asked why he had not warned her privately before the council. Edward confessed that he believed a private objection would be softened, delayed, and ignored. Only a visible refusal could stop the process. The admission wounded her. Still, she accepted that the secrecy surrounding the declaration had made it indefensible, even if the humiliation remained difficult to forgive. Edward offered a compromise. Camilla could retain a defined consultative role over the king's personal program, meaning she could advise on his schedule, appearances, and welfare. But she would hold no authority over William's household, council business, or the future heirs. The queen consort agreed on one condition. The palace must state publicly that Charles cancelled the meeting himself, protecting Edward from being branded a disloyal brother. Before he left, Camilla reached for his hand and said the family had spent too many years confusing silence with loyalty. Their agreement gave Charles a path out. But beyond the palace walls, the cancellation was about to become public before the entire nation. As the brothers prepared to stand together again, the palace gates filled with cameras, headlines, and a public demanding to know who had truly won. The story broke just after sunrise. Within minutes, television crews surrounded Buckingham Palace, radio hosts interrupted scheduled programs, and royal correspondents began speaking of the most serious family rupture of Charles's reign. Yet one image captured the crisis more powerfully than every expert panel. A newspaper held above the crowd outside the palace, its front page carrying 4 words in enormous black letters: Edward Said, number Charles stopped everything. Crowds gathered beneath the balcony, as officials confirmed that Charles had cancelled a scheduled Privy Council session after senior royals challenged the scope of Camilla's proposed household authority. The Privy Council is the formal body of advisors through which the sovereign approves major official decisions. Palace representatives refused to release the private papers, but they stressed that no constitutional transfer of power had occurred. That distinction mattered because the crisis concerned influence around the crown, not the legal surrender of the king's authority. One visitor lifted the front page of the Daily Chronicle above the crowd, and cameras captured the headline before palace aides could shape the story. A national broadcaster described the event as a brother's refusal that forced the crown to choose constitutional restraint over private loyalty. The phrase spread rapidly because it reduced a complex family struggle to one brutal question: had Edward protected the monarchy or publicly defeated Camilla? Edward watched the coverage beside Sophie and visibly winced when commentators called him the man who had brought the queen consort down. During a private recorded conversation, he insisted humiliation had never been his purpose. The trusted confidant reminded him that public stories rarely preserve private motives, especially when one brother appears to have challenged another before the nation. Camilla heard the same words while preparing for a community center engagement. She steadied herself against the dressing table, then refused to cancel. Outside the building, warm applause collided with shouted questions about the council. The queen consort continued through every planned meeting with controlled dignity, because retreat would have looked like defeat, while appearing publicly showed that her service had not ended with one rejected proposal. Charles responded before evening. In a written palace statement, the king accepted personal responsibility for cancelling the session and promised that future arrangements would protect the independence of William and every senior royal household. That mattered because it prevented Edward from carrying the blame alone and reassured the future king that his family could not be directed through another office. Edward then appeared beside Charles at a scheduled reception, while Camilla crossed the room to speak briefly with Sophie. Their presence together was deliberate. The family had rejected permanent division, but one agreement still awaited their signatures. The final verdict would not be written in a headline, but in the decision Charles made when he placed duty, marriage, and brotherhood on the same page. 3 days after the cancelled council, King Charles returned to the same chamber where the crisis had begun. The chairs were arranged exactly as before, but this time there was no grand proposal and no demand for unquestioned support. Edward stood beside Camilla. William and Anne faced them across the table. What followed was not a victory for one royal over another. It was the moment the family finally separated love from authority. Charles opened the revised household declaration and read its promise aloud. The document, a formal written statement defining how royal offices would work together, confirmed that Camilla could advise and support him personally, without holding independent authority over the Privy Council, William's household, or future monarchs. It protected the king's marriage without allowing affection to control succession. William accepted the arrangement after confirming that Catherine and their children would remain under their household's authority. The prince understood the compromise. Camilla retained a respected place beside Charles, while George, Charlotte, and Louis could not be directed through another office. Anne agreed to chair future overlapping household discussions, preventing one team from shaping decisions affecting everyone. Charles signed first. He placed the pen down, looked toward Edward, and said that a brother who refused him honestly was more valuable than one who supported him in silence. Edward did not celebrate. He apologized for the pain caused by his refusal, but maintained that he would make the same constitutional choice again. His answer carried only deep, quiet sorrow. Camilla signed a separate acknowledgement of the boundaries. She told Edward that she would never again ask family loyalty to replace clear consent. The queen consort had lost the wider authority prepared for her, yet preserved something more important: a role the family could accept without fear. Charles finally understood that canceling the council had not been weakness. It protected his marriage from becoming a political weapon and saved the monarchy from a struggle neither side could survive unchanged. Queen Elizabeth's memorandum was sealed in the royal archives, the official collection preserving important royal records, with unanimous agreement. Edward's refusal proved that loyalty could not mean automatic obedience. True loyalty sometimes required stopping power before love overwhelmed judgment. Charles left with Camilla on one side and Edward on the other, united not by silence, but by boundaries they had chosen together. The meeting Charles cancelled became the decision that saved his reign from its most dangerous confusion, and in the end, Edward's refusal did not weaken the monarchy. It reminded the monarchy what it was meant to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.